Hi, welcome to Free Spirit, and welcome to kind of a tip video that I do periodically, answering questions and things that come up in the comments. And this one is all about how to use multiple tarot and oracle decks together in readings. So a lot of the readings I've done for decades have included multiple decks. And so I wanted to share, I mean, everybody does things differently, but I wanted to share how I come up with using multiple tarot decks and oracle decks in readings and answer those questions in the comments. And basically like what to think about when figuring out which decks to use in your tarot and oracle readings. So one thing I wanted to show, like these decks, there are a whole bunch here that I use. I actually keep them in a box. See these little trays? You can get them in Amazon, you can get them in Home Depot, TJ Maxx, Marshalls. Even though you keep your tarot decks and oracle decks on a shelf somewhere or how you store them, if I tend to use a lot of decks, certain decks together in one reading, I even organize that in a different little container here that you see. They're very inexpensive, but then I just grab this and I have the decks that I use in my readings all together. So that's just a little trick that I've developed over the years. But when it comes to using multiple tarot and oracle decks together in a reading, I wanted to point out some things that I've learned over the decades of using decks together, how to easily come up with that. Okay, so for the first thing, I'll put this all in the description box below, but I wanted to share and leave it on the channel for those who do tarot and oracle readings and are wanting to use multiple decks, what I've discovered over decades of doing that. Okay, so the first one is, if you feel guided to use certain tarot and oracle decks together, definitely follow that, because one of my best readings have come from just feeling guided to certain decks and then just doing the reading, just feel completely guided from the get-go. So if you feel guided all of a sudden to use a certain tarot and oracle decks together, absolutely just follow through. You'll be amazed. It's almost like spirit saying their messages in those decks, use them together and you'll be surprised. Another way obviously is if you want to do it by theme, like you just want to do a whole angel reading, a whole spirit reading, grabbing those decks that are across those themes. But the number two thing also is think and feel, what are you really asking answers for? Because that in itself will gear you to the proper decks. There's so many decks with different themes, messages, and everything else. Think and feel, what are you really asking answers for, right? And number three is like, be very familiar with your decks and what are the messages in there, so you know the capability of giving you answers that you seek. So it's like really get comfortable and familiar with your decks. Know what's in your decks. What is it? What can it provide? What's the capability? Number four that they made me write down was, think of it as every conversation is made of lots of words, right? To receive messages and several points. So if you're sitting down, I always look at it as when you're doing a reading, a conversation. So when you're sitting across, when you think of a conversation is made of lots of words to receive messages and points, right? Literally points to be made. So think of each of your decks also as made of words, also giving a point in the overall reading. So if you start looking at that, then you look at your decks as what deck will fulfill that point to make up that whole conversation. So almost they're leading to think of decks as words or a sort of vocabulary you're providing for a conversation, a way of receiving. So the more clear on point options that you choose, you'll receive more unclear messages. So if you know the capabilities of messages from heaven, you know the point that it's going to make, you may want to provide that as an aspect to your reading. So you think of it as a words or a vocabulary you're providing for a full conversation. So look at it as providing words, providing the point that it can make. Think literally of the decks as words, vocabulary that you're giving for a full conversation. So number five, the point was each deck can build, support, and add to the reading. Just as you provide more words to a conversation, the more words and vocabulary you provide, the more full the conversation. So this is all learning what your decks are all about. What are the messages in them, number one. And then providing the words, the vocabulary to give a full reading. And number six, they were saying, get really clear before doing a reading and prepare to receive. So a lot of the times I shared that secret, I use shuffling as a way to clear out. As much as I'm shuffling the cards before I shuffle and see what cards fall out of the deck. I'm using that time to clear out my mind, clear out my heart, get ready to receive. And then number 7 point was, which 7 is divine, trust and know what you're asking for and you will receive. So trust, be really open and clear, and then trust and know what you are asking for, you will receive. So when doing this channel overall readings, I was guided to do this particular combination of decks. There's a whole bunch of decks in here. Usually I use like 6 or 7 decks in my readings. I've always done it that way. Even when I was a kid, I always threw in a whole bunch of decks because I always knew like you want to provide a lot of words, a lot of points to be made. Okay, so that's number 1. So I stored them in a little tray. So whenever I was doing a reading, say for this reading, I had this in a tray all ready to be made of what my conversation, the words, vocabulary that would be used. Basically, it felt like each deck rounded out the reading and each deck provided a point to make. So each point made up the whole reading, and each point of the reading, each deck was a point, and each point built on itself. And when all the decks and points were made, it felt like a complete conversation. At the end, when the reading was completed, it was a complete conversation. That's how it felt the whole time. So this is how I personally have always used multiple decks in tarot and oracle readings. And then I wanted to confide with you something else that happens, especially if you are like myself and you get direct spirit messages. Very often, in my life, I would get a direct spirit message, right? And then I would feel guided to multiple decks, making all the points, almost like a circle. Like you start out with one deck, that's 1 point. You start out with another deck, that's another point. You start out with another deck, it's another point. And what I realized when the points were like a circle and when I finished, it ended with the very spirit message I started with, just like a completed circle. It sort of gave me evidence that using multiple decks can provide all the points to complete a spirit message point. Like driving it home. Like if you got a knowing, a feeling, a download, a spirit message, and then you were guided to decks, the decks provided the point, like where you began with the spirit message. When you did the reading, it ended right where you began. It almost created an exclamation mark or a confirmation to what you got directly. It's really amazing when that happens. But I wanted to share with that because very often my readings would be the additional confirmation or explanation point to what I already got, to what I already knew, to what I already got and received directly. So I find that Tarot and Oracle, why I rave about it all the time is because I do feel it connects you so divinely and back to yourself, but back to it all. And it really, to look at it as a conversation, especially when it comes to using multiple decks, that each one, you have to know your decks, and it's almost like you're providing the words, the points to be made in the reading. So if you want, you have to know what your decks are about, and then look at it as a conversation, and you're providing the words, you're providing the means for them to communicate to you. So know what you want in the reading. What are you looking for to get answers on, and include them all. And feel free to experiment. Feel free to use whatever decks, they said what you're guided to, especially to use together, but then also really know your decks, get familiar with them, what's in them, and then you can understand when you want to do a reading, maybe you want to get some spirit messages, you want to get some guidance, you want to tap into the tarot and see the journey, maybe you want the energy, what to let go of, power of surrender. This could be a full conversation like you're having all at one shot. So whatever decks you use, they were always saying, look at it as a conversation. What are you providing? Like if you're sitting across the table from a person, you don't want to give them just 15 words to make up a whole conversation. Maybe you want to give them 100. But then you want to have it clear. You want to be clear, but you want to supply a vocabulary for them to use to communicate back to you, to receive, right? So that's why multiple decks, it's really interesting to use it. Definitely tarot, I always think of what's the journey, and then you use your different oracle decks on, well, what kind of additional messages do you want to use, So you have to be familiar with your decks and what are they providing you at that time. I will also add here too, what's really interesting, like these are decks that I bought and I consistently use. There's definitely decks I felt guided to buy, and then after the first time I received a message from them, it was like the deck was dead to me after. There was like, it almost served its purpose. So some decks are for like a lifetime, some are for a season, some are just for a particular message at a particular point of your life. So you feel connected and guided with your decks all along the way. And always keep in mind that it is a way to receive messages. So some just out, other than basic tarot decks, which always kind of are universal, so you can always use a tarot deck. But especially with oracle decks, it's very strange that way. So I just wanted to throw that in there. Sometimes it's for a season or for just a one-shot deal, or sometimes it's a lifetime. Sometimes it's just periods of your life and you're guided to certain decks. So going back, I put down below all the multiple ways to use multiple decks, but this is what's worked for me. And I always find also people ask, how do I store my decks? But quite honestly, even though you have a shelf that you put your decks on or something like that, some container like this, these little rectangular, if you tend to use certain decks all the time together, I love being really organized about it and stick them in these things all together so they're already grouped together for your conversation. So that's definitely how I've looked at it all along the years. When I first started out, I had a lot of angel decks. I was always using angel decks. I had a special almost jeweled box. I kept all my angel decks together and did a deck reading with just like 6 angel decks, where it would be a well-rounded reading, hitting all the points, and creating kind of that circle of a whole conversation. So I always regard it as a conversation. And so what do you want to provide? The words, the vocabulary, so they can communicate back to you a full conversation that you need. So I just wanted to share that because it's come up several times, and how I use multiple tarot and oracle decks together in readings, and the ways that that comes about and what to think about when you do that. And it is like a full conversation. So I wanted to briefly do this video and show you personally how I've always done it, what I think about, and it's never failed. Like I always feel like I had a full conversation, and it answered everything that I wanted questions on, and it just felt like a full, complete conversation. And that's how I use multiple tarot and oracle decks together in readings, and how I regard it in the first place. So I wanted to pass it on in case that's helpful, and also show you, everybody asks, how do I store? I have so many decks. Well, even within storing them, when I have a full conversation, like if I feel like this is one conversation that I use over and over again, I'll even get these little containers from anywhere to even further organize by that. So I definitely have that. And yeah, so I wanted to share with you how to use multiple tarot and oracle decks together in readings. There are actually multiple ways, and these were my tips. And I'll put it all down in the description box as well. And I wish you all the best with your readings. I can't say enough of what tarot and oracle readings have done to amplify my connection, and to really be connected. That's why I post all these videos. I just find it just amazing. There are no words for it. And so anything that could be helpful in helping others to have their own divine connection strengthened and heightened, and yeah, I'm all for that, and I'll post whatever I can to help amplify that. So this has been how to use multiple tarot and oracle decks together in readings, multiple ways. These are my personal tips. Take care. Bye-bye.